Everyone thought the billionaire had rescued a poor little girl. They were wrong. 14 years later, his own family would discover that she had been saving him all along. But neither of them could have imagined where that one act of kindness would lead. Time kept moving. Once, Diane asked Richard about Preston. He sighed. His eldest had just been indicted for fraud. Richard had offered the best legal defense money could buy. Preston had asked only for a blank check. He picked his own road, Richard said quietly. I tried teaching him, just too late in the day. Nora, not looking up from her homework, said, You're not a bad father, Richard. Sometimes grown-ups just forget how to listen to the people in front of them. He laughed softly, warmth spreading through his chest in a way money never once managed. You're a wise kid, Nora Foster. At 16, Nora earned a full scholarship into a hospitality and culinary program. Richard had quietly written her recommendation letter himself, though he didn't admit it until years afterward. The winter she turned 17, a mild stroke put Richard in the hospital for observation. Nora sat at his bedside, holding his hand. I'm scared, she whispered. Don't be. I've still got to see you running this place someday. Diane held his other hand, voice breaking. You changed our lives. He shook his head. No, you two changed mine. Before you, I was a bitter old man waiting to die. Now I'm a contented one who wants to keep living. That week, he called his lawyer and began rewriting his will. Exactly 10 years after a cardigan first covered his cold hands, a 20-year-old Nora stood at the entrance of Ashford House, about to be announced as its youngest general manager in training. Richard, leaning on a cane now, stood beside her, eyes bright with something he no longer bothered to hide. You did it, kid. Not just me, she said. We did it. You believed in me before anyone else bothered to. He pulled her into a hug. I love you like you're my own. You know that. I love you too, Richard. Diane stood nearby, phone raised to capture the moment. She now ran the Ashford Foundation, the charity Richard had established for single parents, navigating exactly the kind of hardship she'd once lived through. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the noise came all at once. Preston's chair scraping back, Vivian's voice rising, sharp, disbelieving. Grant already reaching for his phone as though he could call someone to undo it on the spot. The dishwashers, kid? You're joking. Tell me you're joking. I've never been less interested in a joke in my life, Richard said, and there was no anger in his voice. Only the calm of a man who had already made peace with what he was about to say. Firmly, You're welcome to be furious. I understand it, but I'd like you to hear the rest before you leave this room. Preston folded his arms. Go on then, explain it. Richard looked at his children for a long moment, really looked, the way he hadn't in years, and something almost like grief passed over his face before he spoke. You're not wrong that I'm your blood, he said. That's never been in question, but I want to tell you something I should have told you decades ago, and I'm ashamed it took me this long to understand it myself. Being someone's father was never about the money I gave you. It was never about the schools or the trust funds or the checks I wrote instead of showing up. I confused all of that for love for most of your childhoods, and by the time I understood the difference, the three of you had already learned to ask me for things instead of asking me to simply be there. Vivian's jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. 11 years ago, Richard went on, I was tested by a 9-year-old girl who had every reason to take something from me and didn't. She gave me warmth I hadn't earned and didn't ask anything back. She's spent every day since teaching me, without meaning to, what the three of you and I somehow never managed to build together. I'm not punishing you by giving this to her. I'm being honest, for possibly the first time in my life, about where I actually found what I had spent decades pretending money could buy. Grant looked toward Nora, standing quietly by the window. So what, she gets everything and we get a speech? You get the trust funds set up the day each of you was born, Richard said. Untouched, substantial, more than most people will see in several lifetimes. What you don't get is the company, because I don't believe in my heart that any of you actually wants to run it. You want what it represents. That's a different thing entirely, and I think you know that. Nora hadn't moved from the window. When Richard finally turned to her, his voice softened. I'm not doing this because you asked for it, he said. You never once asked me for anything in 11 years. That's exactly why I trust you with it. Nora's eyes were wet, but she held herself steady. I don't want it because it's an empire. I want it because it's yours. That's different too. Vivian stood abruptly, chair legs scraping the floor. She said nothing else, just gathered her bag and walked toward the door. But as she passed the sideboard where Richard kept a small glass case with the old harmonica inside, she stopped, just for a moment. Something flickered across her face, quick and unreadable, before she caught herself and kept walking, heels striking the floor in sharp, even clicks. She didn't look back. Preston and Grant followed without another word. I think what's easy to miss in a scene like this is that Richard didn't just give something away. He said, out loud, in front of the people who'd waited their whole lives to hear it, that he had failed them. That's a harder thing for a proud man to do than simply writing a check. It doesn't undo the years he wasn't there, but it's the first time in the story he chooses honesty over comfort, and does it while he's still around to sit in the discomfort of it, rather than leaving the truth behind in a letter for someone else to read after he's gone. A couple of years later, Richard Ashford died peacefully in his sleep at 88 in the small house near the estate he'd shared, by then, with almost no staff at all. Just Diane, who still checked on him most evenings, and Nora, who visited every Sunday without fail. There was no will reading. He'd settled everything himself, years earlier, in that dining room, while he could still watch what became of it. What Nora found folded into the drawer of his nightstand a few weeks after the funeral wasn't a legal document at all. It was a single handwritten page, dated the same week as that family dinner, that he'd apparently never sent. Nora, I said what I needed to say to my children while I still had the nerve, but I never quite said this part to you, so I'm writing it down instead, in case I run out of time before I work up the courage.
You didn't just get a company from me. You got a father who forgot how to be one and remembered too late for 3 children who deserved better than they got from me. I can't undo that. What I could do was make sure that whatever I'd finally learned about giving didn't die with me in some drawer, unspoken. You gave me 11 years of noise and mess and laughter I didn't think I had left in me. I hope I gave you back a fraction of that. Thank you for noticing I was cold. I never forgot it, and I never will. Nora sat with the letter a long while before she folded it back up. She didn't cry the way she thought she might. Mostly, she just felt the particular quiet of having already said and heard everything that needed saying while there was still time for it to matter to both of them. I think what's easy to miss in an ending like this is that Richard didn't leave Nora a mystery to piece together after he was gone. He'd already said the hardest parts to her and to his children while he was still alive to mean them out loud. The letter wasn't a revelation. It was an old man tidying up the one thing he still felt unfinished about, the way people sometimes do when there's nothing urgent left to prove. Diane found Nora still sitting on the edge of the bed when she came by that evening. She didn't ask what the folded page said. She just sat down beside her daughter, the way she had 100 times before, and waited. "He said thank you," Nora said eventually, quiet, "for noticing he was cold." Diane's eyes filled. "That's the whole thing, isn't it?" she said. "That's all any of this ever was." Nora nodded, and for a while neither of them said anything else. Outside, the evening had turned the color it always turns in early autumn, gold going soft at the edges, and somewhere down the hall a clock kept its slow, steady time, the way it always had in that house.
A few more years on, Nora Foster, 28 now, had settled fully into the life Richard left her. She was no longer the thin girl in the oversized cardigan people remembered from years back. She'd graduated with a degree in hospitality management, a credential most assumed would lead straight to yachts and headline openings. Nora chose something else entirely. Instead of expanding the Ashford brand for profit, she converted the flagship restaurant's top floor into something new. The space that once made staff hold their breath walking past Richard's office became a free culinary training program for kids from single-parent households, kitchen skills, hospitality, a way in for kids who'd never otherwise get a foot in the door. The old office, where the test had once taken place, was no longer a room people entered nervously. It became a reading nook for the younger kids in the program, sunlight pouring through windows that used to stay curtained. At the center of the room, inside a glass case, sat the harmonica. Beside it, framed rather than folded away in a drawer, hung the letter. Richard's handwriting still legible under the glass, the last 2 lines visible to anyone who stopped to read them. "Thank you for noticing I was cold. I never forgot it, and I never will." Beneath both, a small brass plaque read simply, "In memory of Richard Alden Ashford, who learned, late but not too late, that true wealth is measured by what you give away, not what you keep." One quiet afternoon, Nora walked in and found Marcus sitting cross-legged in front of the case, same as he had most afternoons that year. He was 15 now, one of the program's first graduates, back on his day off to help the younger kids with their knife skills the way someone had once helped him. "You ever get tired of reading it?" Nora asked, sitting beside him. Marcus shook his head, eyes still on the glass. "Every time I read it, I catch something different." He nodded toward the last line. "Reflective. That part gets me. It never forgot it, and I never will." Feels like he's still saying it, present tense. Nora smiled. Gently. "That's the whole reason I framed it instead of keeping it in a drawer somewhere. Some things aren't supposed to just sit still and be remembered. They're supposed to keep talking to you." "Did you know him a long time?" 11 years, she said, softly. "Since I was about your little cousin's age, actually. Younger." Marcus glanced at the harmonica. "Curious. And that's really the one? The one from the story?" "The very one." She was quiet a moment, reflective. "It didn't even work when I gave it to him. One of the reeds was bent. He kept it anyway." "Why?" Gently, heartfelt. "Because it wasn't really about the harmonica," Nora said. Reflective. "It never is with things like that. It's about what it costs somebody to give you something, not what the thing's actually worth." Marcus sat with that. "You think I could do something like what you did? Like actually change somebody's whole life just by being decent to them? Nora put a hand on his shoulder. You already are. Every kid you've helped in that kitchen this year, that's the same thing, just smaller and quieter. Nobody writes a letter about most of it. Doesn't mean it didn't count. He nodded slowly, like he was turning it over. Okay, I'll remember that. That's all it ever takes, she said warmly. As Marcus headed back toward the kitchen, Diane walked in, 46 now, gray threading through her hair, her face settled and content in a way it never used to be. Thinking about him? She asked softly, sitting beside her daughter. Every day, Nora admitted, quietly. You think he'd be proud? Diane looked around the room, kids reading, Marcus already coaching someone younger through a knife grip at the training station nearby, laughter drifting in from the hallway. Walls that once felt cold, now full of noise and life. He wouldn't just be proud, he'd be stunned. You took one letter and one broken harmonica and turned it into 100 kids' worth of somebody noticing them. Nora looked toward the case, toward the last line of the letter catching the afternoon light. I just did what he asked, she said quietly. Didn't forget it. That same afternoon, after Marcus had gone back to the kitchen and Diane had wandered off to check the evening reservations, Nora sat alone in the office for a while. Then she did something she hadn't planned, exactly. Something that had been sitting at the back of her mind for years, waiting for the right moment to ask her to do it. She opened the desk drawer, took out the gold watch, the one that had never actually been cracked, the one Richard had worn every day after that first night, the one she now kept safe rather than wore, and set it on the corner of the desk, clasp undone, just slightly out of place, as though someone had left in a hurry. Then she sat back in the chair Richard used to sit in, closed her eyes, and waited. She wasn't testing anyone's honesty. She already knew, better than most people ever would, that a watch left on a desk tells you almost nothing true about a person. What she wanted, she realized as she sat there, was simply to feel it again, the particular quiet of pretending to sleep in that chair, the way he must have felt it 11 years and a lifetime ago. The door opened. A new hire, 17, quiet, a scholarship kid 2 weeks into her first real job, sweeping the hallway outside when she'd been told to wait there a moment, peeked in, saw what she must have assumed was her new employer asleep, and made to back out again, careful not to wake her. Then she noticed the watch. Nora, eyes still shut, heard the girl's footsteps stop, heard the long pause, and then, not the sound of anything being taken, but the quiet scrape of the watch being nudged gently back from the edge of the desk, out of the draft from the propped open window, safely into the light. "Careful," the girl murmured to herself. "Don't want that falling." Nora opened her eyes. The girl startled, gasping softly, hand flying back. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. It looked like it was going to fall, so I—" "You did exactly the right thing," Nora said, her voice thick with emotion. "Sit down a second. I want to tell you a story about this watch, if you've got a minute." The girl sat, hesitantly, on the edge of the small sofa by the window, the same sofa, the same window, the same afternoon light falling across the same old floor. "It's a long story," Nora said, gently, picking up the watch and turning it once in her palm. "It starts with a man who used to sit right here, pretending to be asleep." I think that's the part of this story I keep coming back to. More than the will, more than the money, more than any of it. Kindness doesn't stay where you put it. It moves. Richard tested a stranger out of suspicion and got back more than he knew what to do with. Nora tested no one, wanted nothing, and ended up handing the exact same moment to somebody else anyway, because that's what the good ones eventually do with what was given to them. They don't keep it behind glass forever. Sooner or later, they set it back down on the desk and see who walks through the door next. Outside, the evening service was starting up again. Pans ringing, orders called, a business that had once made one bitter old man wealthy and empty, now making a great many people, in small and unglamorous ways, feel a little less alone. It all started with a girl, a cardigan, and a lesson simpler than anyone expected. Cold is cold, no matter who's feeling it. And every so often, if you're paying attention, you get to watch it happen again. If this story stayed with you, drop a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would have done if it were you in that office. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.